Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much. I suppose the first feeling I have listening is one of total inadequacy. That you people are coming in here today and talking to us, and it's not the first time that we've had presentations on what's happening in Syria, and each time it seems to be getting more and more grim, and very little hope coming out from any of the people whom we have met. It's very hard to imagine a world where, if you just look at the figures, it could be all of our population displaced, or half of them seeking refuge, moving out of Ireland for refuge. The ones who particularly get to me, I suppose, are the children, and some of whom now won't know any other situation except growing up in a conflict situation. And then, as you were saying about people dying from illnesses that are preventable. As Deputy Smith said, I just also wonder about, I know what we're providing is a small drop in the ocean funding-wise, but is it going where you people feel it's most needed? Or could you have other suggestions as to where you would deploy it? One question about Lebanon for Ross. Are you suggesting that the big camps are the way forward? I mean, I know there's terrible pressure on Lebanon, but what do you see as the most humane answer for those refugees moving into Lebanon? And just for GOAL, I was just wondering, when you were talking about those two provinces, are you actually working in parts of Syria where people are trying to lead what we call a so-called normal life? I don't know, can there be a humanitarian solution without a political one? Or do they go together? And this idea about the humanitarian corridor or a possibility of a ceasefire, I mean, is that even being broached with any of the players in Syria? Just as an interim measure so that more aid can go in. And obviously, I do hope that those countries who have pledged money and have not come across with it, that pressure can be brought to bear on them. I think you're totally amazing people, what you're doing. And as I said, we just feel I just feel totally helpless and inadequate, the response of the Western world. I can't understand, okay, chemical weapons, but it's not the first time they were used, but that seems to have taken up all of the energy. But maybe it can be a way forward to look at the broader picture, because there's more than chemical weapons that are destroying people and destroying their lives.
I will go back over maybe a couple of the points that my colleagues have touched upon, and just from our own perspective, maybe add that the UN are kind of stymied in Syria at the moment, because they're unable to really move without the sanction of the government in Damascus, and it will take something very, very special for that to change. Because it hasn't really happened before, it'll have to be something extra special. And that's where you come in. Not us. We're on the ground, we're implementing, we're addressing humanitarian need, but the UN are going to have to change the way they work because of the way the situation is, not just in Syria, but the way the situation is going in the world today. It has become so complex. There was a mention of the US, or the UN Security Council. If it was a baby of the 20th century, let's sort it in the 21st century now. It isn't fit for purpose in certain contexts. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but it's all there has been allowed to be to date. Again, it's going to take something very, very special to change that. And unfortunately, I don't think our select group around the table today is going to be able to come up with that solution. There was a mention of, can there be a humanitarian solution without a political solution? I think it's important to clarify, there is no such thing as a humanitarian solution. There is humanitarian assistance, there is humanitarian work, but it is a political and a diplomatic solution to the crisis that is required. And in the meantime, a need for humanitarian work, and hopefully at a certain point, an opportunity for recovery and longer-term recovery work, which at this moment in time, some observers are suggesting will take decades in Syria for them to be able to return to where they were before. In terms of humanitarian corridors, I think it's fair to point out as well, and it's been mentioned by my colleagues here beside me, there is no one Syrian opposition. An estimated 400 to 600 different groups and movements make up the sum of the Syrian opposition. They are loosely affiliated by one purpose, and that is to see an end to the Assad regime. After that, in some respects, all bets are off. Some are more fundamentalist, some are more secular. Some have a national focus, but most have just a local and a grassroots focus. So every area we work in, and we work in a different area geographically to where GOAL are. MSF are working in the area where we are as well. But it's fair to say that the dynamics and the context is actually different in every different part of Syria, due to the makeup of the different clans and the different movements and groups, the struggle for power that is going on at a very localized level. And I think, again, when we're actually looking at how do we approach the problem of delivering humanitarian assistance, as I mentioned, in a very slow, a very considered, a very measured way, it is just because this is probably the single most complex situation we have ever come across. And so there is no book we can refer to. We are experienced, we do know what we're doing, we do have approaches, but it is about, and it was been mentioned already, flexibility, adaptability, and working through the problem, and dialogue with the different movements and groups who are now starting to take control in different areas and in different locations. The amount of tea we drink in Syria right now is unbelievable, because that is how we dialogue. Sitting there with groups and movements and dialoguing. In terms of the humanitarian corridors, through a combination of the UN being stymied, they aren't able to operate as they were designed to operate. There is no UN operating in the geographic area where we work. So when you're talking about, a greater balance of where funding goes, and as mentioned by one of my colleagues here, let the funding go to where the needs are, where the identified needs are, to those agencies that are addressing those needs realistically on the ground. Where the UN are running refugee camps, let a proportional amount of aid go to them in those refugee camps. Where the NGOs who are inside Syria currently, inside certain parts of Syria, where the UN are, let's say, struggling to operate legitimately, then I think that needs to be recognised. I will ask my colleague Peter Doyle here, the desk officer for Syria and Lebanon, to, Maureen, more specifically to come back to your question on camps. He's actually more familiar with the Lebanese context than I. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Thanks. I wanted to address the issues that you raised.
At the end, I don't want to cut anybody short, but I come at the end because in 15 minutes, I have to be in a different location in the other house. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you.
You were raising the issue about the larger scale camps in the Lebanon. The situation there at the moment is that the Lebanese government does not want these kind of large-scale camps, so they're limiting the types of accommodation that are available to refugees. So, for example, refugees could be staying in tented settlements, and there's a maximum limit of 20 families per settlement. They're also staying in collective centres, which can be farm buildings or rented buildings that are refurbished by NGOs like Concern that can host refugees. And many of them are, in fact, just renting. They could be renting a garage or renting a plot of land. And what we're finding is that actually those solutions are now becoming saturated. And I mean, a lot of the number of evictions has actually increased. We've been finding since September as people can no longer afford to keep paying some of the accommodation options that they have. So it's not that we're necessarily calling for large-scale camps or that we think this is the ideal solution. It's not. I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to everything. But we're just saying that, try and reconsider this prohibition, this kind of the way they're just prohibiting the larger scale camps, because we need to think about other solutions, given the sort of saturation levels that we have in all the other types of accommodation. Someone also asked about sectarianism in the camps. What we're finding in northern Lebanon where we work is that it's quite a homogenous population, refugee population. In fact, they're coming mostly from the same kind of sect. Where there can be tension, or where it does seem to be increasing, is between the host population, the Lebanese population, and the incoming refugees. It's one of the reasons why organizations like Concern, we also try to provide assistance that would also benefit the host population and not just the refugees. For example, some of our water supply projects are benefiting both local people and refugees. In addition to that, we're also going to try and facilitate some dialogue between refugees and host populations to try and talk through any issues and try and sort of calm any tensions that might arise.